One.
Hello and welcome everyone to this week's edition of Truth to Power with me, Justin Mogg, co-hosted this week with two other programmers here on Forward Radio. For the first time, we have Ruth Newman joining us from Election Connection or COVID Connection. I don't know what you want to call it these days, but welcome, Ruth.
Some combination of the two, if you can think of that.
But Ruth is the reason I'm involved with Forward Radio. She has been there from the very beginning on this project and was one of the key people getting this station on the air, and her passion for community radio just hooked me in and got me going in it as well. And also on the virtual studio with us today is Hart Hagan, host of The Climate Report and a new show that's going to start this week, premiering on Thursday at 7 called Let's Talk. Welcome, Hart.
Thank you, Justin.
Great
Good to be here.
Great to have you back on Truth to Power. And then we have two community guests, experts, I want to call them today, on our topic of sustainable transportation and what's wrong with our current transportation system and what we can do to make it better, especially here in Louisville, but really around the country. And we have two Jackies with us joining us, so don't get confused, listeners. We have, let's start with Jackie Cobb. She's a transportation advocate from here in Louisville. Welcome, Jackie.
Hey, good to be here.
And then the other Jackie is Jackie Green, owner of Bike Couriers Bike Shop, also a transportation advocate. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you, Justin. Great to be here.
Everybody's joining us in the virtual studio, so you'll have to apologize. We're not up to our usual audio quality, but we are keeping the community conversation happening even in the midst of a pandemic. That's what we do here on Forward Radio. We think it's so important to keep these conversations happening, even though things are crazy. And that's what we do on this show here every week. Is
come quarantine with us.
Come quarantine with us and have a conversation, right? And today we're going to talk about transportation and our vision for a sustainable transportation system in Louisville. Does anybody want to, I guess that's a good way to start, if we each sort of go a little around the table and maybe talk about what our vision for what would a sustainable transportation system look like in Louisville? You want to start, Jackie Cobb?
I think it would be just wonderful if you could have the choice in Louisville to get where you wanted to by bike and walking safely. Because really, I don't think there's a choice today. Because it's just not safe. So we just need to work towards having a streetscape and an infrastructure that allows people to hop on a bike or, walk where they want to go in our community.
So for Jackie Cobb, it's all about choices. What about you, Jackie Green? How would you describe vision for a sustainable transportation system in Louisville?
Well, I would take a different perspective on this from the one that Jackie just outlined. I haven't had a car here in Louisville since 1999. I live in the Highlands and work downtown and around U of L and in Clifton. I find our streets very, very safe. You have to be proactive, you have to be assertive, but I find our streets to be safe for cyclists. If the cyclists take certain actions to maintain that safety. But the vision I would have would be the same as Jackie's that she's outlined. And it would be great to be able to live one's life easily by bike and foot and supplement with that with public transit. In order to do that, we have to change our land use. Land use and transportation cannot be separated one from the other.
Yeah, that's a huge point. That's where I would start myself. If I was laying out this vision, it would be one where we need less transportation because we have more dense development and we all live within I guess 3 miles or something like that of where we work, where we play, where we shop, where we pray. Everything we need should be within 3 miles or so. That would be my vision of true urban living. If you're not going to live like that, then sure, go out, live out in the country. But if you want urban living, then you gotta expect things like walkability and bikeability and public transportation and being close to everything you need. That's the whole advantage of an urban living. I don't understand why we live in cities if we're not going to do that. What about you, Hart and Ruth? What do you think for visions of sustainable transportation?
Well, okay, so I did like 2 or 3 episodes on Climate Report about how we could reduce air travel by 90% and not have that be a sacrifice, but be a step toward abundance, how we can reduce cars by 90% and not have that a sacrifice, not that be a sacrifice, but a step toward abundance. And so, we need to stop listening to the lies of the powers that be, the big money powers that say this is so difficult and it's un-American and so forth. So I don't want to monopolize the time, but when I have a little time on this show, I'd just like to go through a few points about how we could reduce air travel and cars by 90% and have that be a step toward abundance. The Green New Deal is not expensive. And what's expensive is the system that we have. For example, the average car costs $9,000. It's like, by my math, we Louisvillians spend like $4.5 billion a year on cars. Take a fraction of that and put it into mass transit and put it into the alternatives to automobiles, and it would be a step toward abundance for actual people, as opposed to what we have now. All the money that you spend on a car every year goes to the oil companies and the car companies and the insurance companies and the banks. It's not expensive to change. It's just expensive for the people that already have more money than God, and it would be cheap for us. So we need to stop. We need to demand of our Metro Council and everybody on up that they stop pulling our chain and wasting our time on this crap that we have.
Yeah, it really does come down to priorities. Ruth, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I would like to almost think of it as trying to get closer to our own biology and our own functionality and our own joys and purpose for being on this planet. If we could start from those kinds of assumptions of, well, and I like your thought too, Justin, of having it be connected up with land use, because we need to become more biological and less artificial and industrial, I think. And bicycles are one route to becoming more biological and natural, closer to our nature. And the whole idea of having parking lots and parking garages and buildings in order to house cars seems, on the face of it, so insane to me. So I feel like, and we have so many innovative ideas now, like directionless, what is it called? Driverless.
I hope they're not directionless.
Edit that out. Driverless.
Justin,
cars.
where's your sense of adventure?
Yeah, right.
So I would like to see us as a biological system, and transportation as the circulatory part of that biological system, and have it be more natural and according to what human nature is all about, which is physical.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a cool way of thinking about it.
If I could bounce off that, it's like, what do people really want? I mean, what people want, they want to be healthy, they want education, they want community, they want family. What people really want boils down to a few basic things that are readily available to us if, like Justin said, we could change our priorities. So I think Jackie was going to say something.
Well, just building off of what Ruth said, I think that, you know, when you can get out of a car and get where you want to go on your own two legs or two wheels, then you start to connect with nature and your neighbors and your surroundings in a way that you just aren't aware of if you're in a metal box. And so I think there's a lot of community building and, you know, mental health that comes with reevaluating how we move ourselves. And that's a really important piece of it, in addition to the environmental ramifications of building roads and repaving them and, you know, buying and maintaining cars. I think our transportation system hits on environment, public health, community, finances, so many dimensions of community and city, you know, well-being.
Right. And okay, so the car companies sell us cars, and there's nothing free market or democratic about the transportation system that we have. I mean, go out and look, it's not easy, not hard to be on Shelbyville Road or Dixie Highway or I-64 or I-65. It's not hard to, in a snapshot, see 50 cars, sometimes as many as 100 cars, and 0 trains. That's not an accident. It is contrived. It is not a result of a free market economy or a democracy. It has been imposed upon us by the, you know, go back to the late 40s, early 50s. They knew they were going to need a lot of government spending to not slip back into a depression. So instead of spending it on schools and hospitals and other things that, you know, addressing poverty and things that people actually need, they decided to spend it on military and this big transportation system. And so it's a choice, a public policy choice. It is not something that happened by accident. To think that it happened by accident is a myth, and I'm monopolizing all the time, and Ruth wants to talk next.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that too, because I grew up in Los Angeles.
Oh boy.
And, yes, and what I learned as a child was that there used to be a very good electric bus or electric rail, light rail service in Los Angeles. And what happened, what I was told happened, was that the car companies bought that all out. They bought all the rails out and they just took them apart. They removed them so that there wouldn't be that choice. There would only be roads for cars. So it's not only the government that did it hard, it was also the private business that did it too.
And the same thing happened here in Louisville too. We used to have a really reliable rail system in our city, and it really controlled the patterns of development. People wanted to live within close walking distance to those streetcar lines. And what we used to call the suburbs were places like Douglas Loop, right? It was the end of the trolley line in those days. And that was also intentionally dismantled by the powers that be that wanted to transition us towards more cars, more roads, further out suburbs, so we could make money off of developing all that green space out on what used to be the edge of town, and is now places like Butchell and Hurstbourne, all these places that we think of as part of the city, but they're really suburbs, right? So these are kind of the obstacles. What would more sane urban planning look like in our minds? What should Louisville look like if we really wanted to develop a city that could meet these visions of sustainable transportation? Jackie Green, you've been talking for a while.
Sure. I go back always to land use. One other thing, let me correct something that I started out with. When Jackie Cobb mentioned how unsafe our roads are, she's exactly right relative to the suburban and exurban roads. Our traffic is much too fast. And she's right also regarding that geography that I described, which is closer into the central business district. I stepped out of the bike shop the other day onto the sidewalk, and I looked westward along Market Street, and there were 3 cars in this 6-lane road over a distance of over a block. 3 cars, 6 lanes, a distance of a block, and 2 of them managed to run into each other.
Oh,
You know, I don't know. Well, I'll let that go.
it's a metaphor for.
But Ruth, that speaks to your directionless drivers.
I knew there was
Yes.
a point to that.
Yes. So transportation and land use. I have a vision. Are you familiar with the mud lot downtown? It's between Liberty and Jefferson and 8th Street and 9th Street. It's an entire city block. It's owned by the city and is a parking lot. It's a surface parking lot for city-owned vehicles. I would love to see the city take those vehicles and park them 2 abreast on Market Street, Liberty, Jefferson, and narrow the capacity of the street. Take capacity away from the cars. In doing so, you would also empty that lot, that entire city block, and we could create a beautiful urban park. That's part of just using the resources that we have. Those cars are resources, if you look at them as traffic blockers. And we should use them as such. And I say that not lightly. I think cyclists are some of the greatest tools that the city has to calm traffic. We too are faster traffic blockers. A cyclist in the travel lane is dominating that lane and dictating the speed of those behind the cyclist. When our city puts the cyclist over to the right or left of the travel lanes in a bike lane, the city has just lost its best tool for calming traffic. That's a different way to look at
Oh, wow, yeah.
cyclists, a different way to look at bike lanes. But those are a couple of areas that if we were to take capacity away from cars and the number of cars going downtown were to change and people would use public transit, they would bicycle in, they would live closer in, they would walk, then my neighbors who own parking lots downtown, surface parking lots, would lose all of their customers, or they would lose enough customers that it would no longer be financially viable to maintain those as surface parking lots. And having lost that income stream, they will begin to say, wait a minute, well, I need to do something else with this resource, this urban space. And my hope is that they would then build up, go vertical, housing and commerce, and get rid of the surface parking lots.
I do think there's a realization and understanding that streets and space is a city resource that is just not being recognized today. One project that I've wanted to sort of tackle over the years is calculating how much surface area is dedicated to roads today, not parking lots, just roads. Within the city, within the county, like what percentage of the county's surface area is roads, and understand the city is really not harvesting any value from those from a property tax perspective, and understanding that, you know, there is more value that our city can get from those roads instead of them being a liability in a way of really just being this asset that needs to be maintained and paved over time. So I do think there's something to be said with seeing roads and the road space as a resource that is being underutilized. Jackie, I think I have a different opinion of kind of, I don't think on a bike I want to be a traffic calming device, you know, because I would just be scared that, you know, cars are going to hit me. But I understand what you're saying, that, you know, theoretically a car, you know, if you're a bike in front of a car, if they don't hit you, you will slow them down. But I think there's just a, you know, a kind of a fear factor of being a traffic calming device in front of a car. But couldn't agree with you more that we need to take capacity away from cars and allow for our roads to act for more than just cars.
Well, and I'll say too, a well-designed bike lane can narrow the roadway and
exactly, and do it all.
Do a similar effect to what Jackie's talking about. But Jackie's talking about sort of the pace car effect of traffic, and no matter what vehicle you're on, whether it's a bike or a car, you can be that pace car and actually drive responsibly or bike responsibly so that everyone in the lane will be going the speed limit. But you can't do it on Market Street where there's 6 lanes and they could just zoom on to the next one, right? So you need to create a roadway that actually is sane, and then it'll be safe for everybody. We're talking about transportation here today on Truth to Power with me, Justin Mogg. I'm co-hosting with Hart Hagan and Ruth Newman, also Forward Radio programmers, and we've got a couple Jackies as community guests today on our show. You just heard from Jackie Cobb and Jackie Green. They're both transportation advocates here in Louisville, and we're talking about more sustainable system. And there's been some big news on transportation. We'll talk about public transit a little bit later, but I want to share some of the budget news that's just come out and see what you all think about it. The mayor has just submitted a proposed capital budget to the Metro Council for the upcoming fiscal year that's going to start July 1st. It did not include funding, which is only $60,000, to conduct a detailed traffic analysis of removing the Bardstown Road peak hour lane lights, what makes it always look like Christmas on Bardstown Road with all those crazy lights. It was a top recommendation of the Bardstown Road safety study that was recently done. But in good news, the budget does include $2.5 million for intelligent traffic signal synchronization along that Bardstown Road corridor, all the way from Broadway to the Gene Snyder, that would support congestion mitigation and future bus rapid transit on that corridor. It also includes funding for conversion of at least 8 streets that are currently one-way in downtown Louisville to two-way traffic flow, and construction of 10 more miles of the Louisville Loop multi-use bike and walk path that's supposed to be a 100-mile loop around Louisville. So that's a bunch of things for us to chew on. Does anybody want to talk about their thoughts or reflections on any of those particular things?
I have a question about that loop funding, the loop funding, because, correct me if I'm wrong, that's mainly for recreation, is that right? That is for people to, yeah, and I remember back when I used to attend those yearly bike summits that they had. I guess maybe they still do, I don't, but years ago, I attended that couple of bike summits. And I was very dismayed that so much emphasis seemed to be placed on bicycles for recreation rather than for commuting. I mean, so many people can't even afford cars, you know, and they're stuck or they're dependent on the bus service. And it just seems to me that the priority should be on commute and not the loop and recreation. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. Although I also have lived in cities like Madison, Wisconsin, where there's an extensive network of off-street paths that actually are useful for transportation and can get you from A to B. Some people use them for recreation too, of course, but that's a different kind of system than what we have in Louisville. We don't have too many paths that are actually useful for transportation. I have no idea which 10 miles of the Louisville Loop they're talking about completing here, but I imagine it's not the 10 miles that I would be most interested in, which is basically from the Big Four Bridge going east. It would be nice, and you could get to destinations to the east if there was off-street paths that sort of took you that direction. I don't know that they've even figured out what that part of the Louisville Loop will ever look like. But yeah, I agree with you. What other people think about that?
I agree with Ruth. I have always been dismayed at the attention that bicycling facilities are given as recreation. Yes, they're wonderful recreational tools, but they're also critical transportation for many. In fact, about 2.5 months ago, we contacted the mayor's office as they were considering who stays open,
Oh, yeah.
who is closed because of the virus. And we reminded the mayor's office of the 24% of the Louisville households that live without cars. These households do not have cars.
Wow. 24%.
24% was the figure that I saw. And the bicycle is a primary mode of transportation. I was grateful that the mayor, and we asked the mayor to remind the governor of this same percentage. I was grateful to see both of them making the right decisions and leaving bike shops open to service that need. Yeah, as to your traffic signals, another vision that I've had for a long time is to turn the traffic signals to blink either red or yellow, but never green. That would slow traffic. And I know that works counter to congestion mitigation, but it would slow traffic. And in the longer term, it would reduce traffic, and therefore the congestion mitigation goals might be met that way. But if motorists approached an intersection that's blinking yellow or red, they're going to be focused on that intersection and not on trying to make an intersection 3 blocks away. The city has toyed with this concept along Cherokee Road. I believe Cherokee and Longest, and there's another road, I don't remember which one, but they've taken out the traffic signals.
Yeah.
Or maybe they didn't take, I don't know, I guess
Yeah, they did. They replaced the traffic signals with stop signs.
And that was your idea, wasn't it, Ms. Cab?
Yes. Talked about that with Cone and Public Works, and they decided to demo it, and we had it for a few months, and they watched it and decided that it was fine. And quite frankly, I've noticed that cars drive a slower speed because they aren't trying to make that next light that they see off in the distance. And then, of course, walkers don't have to wait for their turn on the light turn. So, that's my thought on, focusing on traffic signal coordination, is that at the end of the day, traffic signals are for cars. And they serve a purpose. I'm not saying I want to get rid of all of them, but if we focus our efforts on traffic signals alone, then we're probably missing some other opportunities. So I'm not familiar with the extent of what they plan to do with the traffic signals on Bardstown Road, so I couldn't comment on specifically, that project. But I'm a little bit wary of spending a whole lots of money on traffic signals when I think maybe an intervention in the street otherwise that could just eliminate the signal and make the lane more hospitable for all users, and with a priority on non-vehicles is the way to go. And then the study, I think I'm a little bit skeptical of the need to study on paper everything when we could do a practical rendering of something and see how it works, kind of like we did on Cherokee, right? There was not a commissioned $20,000 study on Cherokee and Longest and Cherokee on Patterson. They just did it in a safe, easy, cheap way to see if it worked, and then we did it. I kind of feel like right now we're kind of demoing the elimination of the lane lights on Barcelona right now. And so what if we put up some cones to emulate the parking spots that are in the plan,
Right.
and watched it and said, okay, great. We don't need a $60,000 study because we figured out what we need to from this demo. So, you know,
Those $60,000 studies are important because somebody's making money off of those.
and it's sort of like this expectation in the traffic engineering community that you have to have it to kind of get to the next step. And so I think we need to get to the next step with Bardstown Road. So if, especially because it's a state road, like if this state is so rigid that they have to have the study, then like by all means, let's figure out a way to get $60,000. But at a higher level, I just sort of question the premise of always needing this traffic study that's based on hypotheticals. Can't we figure out a kind of more rough and dirty way to get to the same point, to make decisions that make sense for our community?
But that traffic industrial complex needs to be challenged.
Yes, it does. It does.
People think a lot about traffic, even in this town where, I mean, if you compare our traffic woes to Chicago, right, it's nothing. And yet everybody talks about it all the time and we throw money at it. And right now the state is investing in widening the Gene Snyder, for instance. I mean, is this really,
I-64
and 64, is this really the top priority for the state's transportation spending?
I have a speech. So what if our transportation system was of the people, by the people, for the people? What if it were actually designed to serve the needs of people? I mean, do we or do we not have a climate crisis? Do we or do we not have a sixth mass extinction of a rapid diminution of biodiversity? By the way, Jackie, a couple of stats that I've heard. Michael Parenti says that 60% of the built area in a typical urban area is for our cars. Another thing that I've heard, like David Corton says, that the space required for an automobile is 3 times the space required for a family home. So our automobiles take more space than we live in.
Wow.
So at some point you have to change. What's the difference between incrementalism and revolution? And when I talk about revolution, do we not need a revolution? If the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we have 10 years to change our ways or else, and if we've already lost so much biodiversity and so much environmental health, so much clean water and clean air, do we not need a revolutionary change? So at some point you have to change the economics, and we could have progressive taxes on luxury automobiles and on new automobiles. We could have steep prices for parking downtown. We could have a metro council that actually does something other than grease the skids for multinational corporations and absentee investors to come and have their way with our community. But you have to change the economics of it, and the economics of change cannot fall on average people. The economics of true change has to fall on the people that already have more money than they'll ever spend, and the corporations that already own our government and need to be called to heel. Just say it.
Well, I would like to pose a question. I'm rather ignorant on this subject, but it just seemed so exciting to me when I heard some gleanings of what could be happening if we indeed changed over to driverless cars. If we changed over to driverless, these are driverless electric cars, would we even need parking garages or any kind of garages, because they would never have to park, as I understand it. They would just come to your house, you would get in, you would go to wherever it was you needed. It would be controlled by, the intelligence of the computer. And it would just circulate around town just like your your
To,
blood cells.
to me, the only way that would work is if it was public.
Yes.
But I can't imagine that in America that's going to happen, right? I can only imagine that there'd be the next Uber driverless car and the Lyft driverless car, and then they would all be competing, and then you'd have twice as many vehicles as you would actually need, right?
Yeah, but the thing of it is, Justin, at least now, and I don't know how long this pandemic is going to last, you don't want to get in the car with anyone else. You just want to be in the car all by yourself. And it seems to me that driverless cars, if we are setting ourselves up, which I think, Hart, what you were saying about how we are destroying the planet and how we are really degrading our own health in all kinds of ways, which is also true of all of these viral diseases that are coming up. If this is going to end up being long term and it's going to change our lifestyle, it may be the entree into a revolution where we would have to have cars that only fit one person. You can't have Lyft, can you? Or Uber fitting just one. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, Ruth, I have to challenge this concept.
Me too, but go ahead.
Driverless cars do nothing to reduce the road surface.
Right.
Driverless cars do nothing to reduce the coal and the fracked gas that is burned in these so-called electric cars. Our electric cars are nothing but coal burning and fracked gas vehicles. Even if you have solar panels on your house and you charge your car, that's perfectly beautiful solar power gone to waste. All right? So I would challenge, and I have for years, for 20 years, challenged that electric vehicle, and lately I've begun to challenge this new driverless car. Our roads, and I think Jackie Cobb, this will resonate with Jackie, our roads from my perspective are what I like to refer to as the commons. The sidewalk, the roads, the alleys, those are the commons. And Hart was speaking of for the people, of the people, by the people. We need to reclaim the commons and take it back. That's Jackie, one of the reasons I like the revolutionary concept of riding in the driving in the travel lane. But you are so correct, Jackie, in that people are very, people are afraid to mix it up with larger vehicles. Everybody has a different risk tolerance. I have a very high risk tolerance. I've not been wearing a mask. We've not lost an hour of work at the bike shop. I've not worn gloves. I have a high risk tolerance. I'm older. I am at risk statistically, but nothing's guaranteed in life. So I ride in the road.
I'd like to comment on the driverless cars as well. I think that, there may or may not be a technology that comes out in the future where we have a driverless car, but I agree with Jackie that it doesn't solve a whole lot of problems that we have with transportation by just having driverless. Road surface, the amount of finances we use to maintain those roads, the cost that it is to an individual to own, maintain,
urban sprawl.
Like a lot of that, is gonna, stick around. So, perhaps there is a driverless car that comes out and supplements it, but I think waiting for that to be a savior, or somehow thinking we should just kind of design our transportation around this, tool that doesn't exist. And, Uber tried one and ran over a pedestrian because the car couldn't sense the walker across the street, is a mistake that we should really refocus on human powered mobility. And that kind of be a supplement if it comes in a safe form down the road.
Yeah, okay, can I wait? Justin, did you want to?
No, I was going to echo what you said about it. It really doesn't get at the main problem here, which is that our current transportation system, any car-based transportation system, facilitates the endless urban sprawl and separates the wealthy from the poor in the urban center, right? I can imagine how unjust a transportation system built on driverless cars would be unless it was free for everybody, and I just don't imagine that ever happening. Go ahead, Hart.
Driverless cars are like Obamacare. It kind of moves incrementally towards solving problems that need to be solved, but the problems that leaves unsolved are unforgivable and inexcusable. Plus, it's like, okay, Google is going to save the day, and don't get me started on how these companies even have control of technology that the taxpayers developed to begin with. So we're letting Google and whoever else is involved with driverless cars position themselves as the saviors. They're going to come through with the technology to save the day when the technology that they're using is developed at government expense. Some of it, the rest of it is developed because they have this monopoly power. But I want to echo what Justin said about public transportation has to be free. It has to be taken care of. It has to be, we need trains that are free. And I'm not saying every single thing needs to be free, but like Dennis Kucinich proposed that there be free buses in Cleveland. And somebody said, if you did that, people would use it. So, I mean, when I tried to ride the bus recently, giving the fare, it's the mechanics of giving not just the $2, but the fact that I had two $1 bills and one of them was torn and almost didn't get to ride the bus. Plus they meander through these neighborhoods. There's no reason for these buses to take an extra half hour to meander through these neighborhoods. They need to be more just doing the arteries. They need to be not blocked by all these cars that we have, and you have to change the economics to do that. But so much of what the city does with TARC is just incremental BS. It gets on my last nerve. Don't get me started.
I'm glad you brought that up, Hart, and I want to remind everybody that you're listening to Truth to Power here on Forward Radio, your community radio station, broadcasting from the Hayburn Building at 106.5 FM and live streaming to the world at forwardradio.org. Here on Truth to Power, we have a community conversation every week with Forward Radio programmers like me, Justin Mogg, Hart Hagan, who you just heard from, and Ruth Newman joining us in the virtual studio today. And then we have community guests this week, two Jackies, Jackie Cobb and Jackie Green, as we talk about sustainable transportation in Louisville. And that's the other big piece of news I wanted to share. It does relate to TARC. On April 29th, TARC announced plans to radically realign its system map and ultimately eliminate about half of their current routes, eliminating 22 of 47 current routes. And they're taking public comment throughout the month of May, I believe. The changes, the first phase would start on August 9th, and there will be some public hearings coming up online May 13th at 5:30 and May 18th at noon, and those are taking place virtually, so you can go to ridetarc.org and sign up and get the link to join in on those public conversations. The first phase, though, is going to eliminate the express routes except 61, 67, and 78, but all other express routes would be eliminated. It would eliminate some of the circulators downtown, the Lulift circulator and circulator 96, which is basically a parking shuttle for the medical campus, and also local route 62, which doesn't connect to downtown. So in a way, it's about this vision that Jackie Green has always espoused, that TARC is failing because it's trying to serve the sprawling city, and with very limited resources we can never serve the sprawling city well. And that's not just true of transit, by the way. That's true of all public utilities and everything else that we try to extend further and further away. We're going to fail, but it's certainly making TARC fail. And so I'm pretty excited about this because, 90%, 7% of the riders use barely half of the current routes on the TARC system. And there are some routes where it costs TARC $60 per rider to operate the service, whereas elsewhere in the city, it's about $2.50 per rider. So these kinds of expenses make it impossible for the system to function. And so Jackie Green has always said, let's just have transit within the Waterson, basically. Focus all of our resources there. We would have a world-class transit system serving our urban core, and then people would want to live here. People would want to invest here because it's a great place to be, right? You don't even have to look at a schedule. You just walk down the street and you hop on the next bus, and there's one every 5 minutes, like in some cities, right? Jackie, what do you think? Jackie Green, did you get a chance to look at these TARC proposals, and what do you think about them?
I have not yet looked at the proposals. I will do so, but you're right. I have long suggested that we cut out a lot of the long distance routes and the routes that Hart has mentioned, which meander seemingly aimlessly through neighborhoods.
A directionless car we're all looking for.
Yeah, we do need to focus on those corridors that are already popular. And what that will do, if we focus the investment along those corridors, will make the real estate along those corridors much more attractive to investors and to businesses and to residences. They will want to live along the corridor so they can hop a bus and get to work or get wherever they're going.
And those buses, Jackie, too, also act, like you said, as that pace car. Transit will also help calm traffic, just like cyclists.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, I was reviewing it yesterday, and I think that we could encourage TARC to take it a little bit farther, to be honest. I think that some of the routes that they leave completely intact and unchanged could be improved, and other routes could be cut, shortened, simplified, maintained along more straight lines versus some meandering. I in general am in favor of, the changes that they're going to make to the TARC system, but I think they could go farther in the same vein. And my thinking is, if we did go a step farther, could we increase frequency on some of the current routes that are super popular? Yeah. Because that was not a recommendation in this overhaul. And I think, I don't have the statistics in front of mine that TARC does in terms of which are the most heavily frequented, but there are probably some routes where if we doubled down, we could double the frequency of some of the routes that are wildly popular.
Jackie, I like your concept. In fact, I would love to see your response to TARC. I'd like to read that, which I think would be a great help. But the increased frequency will happen organically by shortening the distance of the route. It will free up several minutes on each bus.
Yep.
I like Jackie Green's concept of keeping it all within the Waterson. At first I said, huh? And then when you think about it, for one thing, you're saving your resources for where it really counts. For another thing, you're making it more attractive to live within the Waterson. And less attractive to live outside the Waterson. You could even have park and TARC strategically located so that they actually hold a volume of cars, and that reduces the total amount of space required by cars in parking and driving. And somebody tell me why we have such thing as parking minimums. It's like when you establish a business, you have to have a parking minimum. You have to have a minimum number of parking spaces associated with that business, the exact opposite of what we need, it would seem.
It's asinine.
Thank you.
It is changing, though. Develop Louisville is seriously taking measures to reduce those minimums. Downtown, there are no minimums, and they're extending the area to include a greater area where there are at least minimums of lower numbers. So I think the city's making some progress on that front.
Don't give the city credit. I want to diss the city. I want to trash the city whenever possible.
No,
Anyway.
I heard the same thing that Jackie Green just said, that there's supposed to be an announcement sometime in 2020 on, consideration of parking minimums on Bardstown Road and potential change to those. So,
Wow.
That would be promising.
That would be. Wow.
I think maybe my personal last comment on the TARC is, it brings us back to where we started a little bit with looking at land use. I also think there's a consideration when we think about where TARC should run to really look at the land use of the places through which TARC runs, right? Let's look at running TARC where people can easily walk from where they are to the TARC route. And some neighborhoods, it's really impossible to think people are really going to do that. So it all factors together.
Yeah, that's why I had pretty mixed feelings about the whole Dixie Highway bus rapid transit. I mean, just the thought of being on foot anywhere near Dixie Highway corridor is kind of intimidating. I'm sure there are people on foot, and I'm sure there are people who use the bus there, and they deserve good transit service too. But is that really where we should be prioritizing something like bus rapid transit? What do you all think about that one?
Justin, if I may, I think let's refer to it as BRT, bus rapid transit, BRT, just for ease of speech. The BRT along Dixie Highway is a bait and switch. That is at best BRT light. There are no dedicated bus lanes on that so-called BRT corridor. The buses themselves are not to BRT standards. The bus stops are not to standard. There are several ways that that system fails to reach the standard of bus rapid transit. I fear that Dixie Highway BRT is not going to measure up to expectations. And once again, people will say, see, public transit doesn't work. I hope I'm wrong on that.
Failure by design. Okay, it's tinfoil hat time. It's hard, but it's hard for, Ruth talked about how we know that the car companies destroyed trolleys and trains back when there was a critical juncture. Are we going to, if you look at films from World War II, a lot of the troops were going to and from the coast in trains. Passenger trains were still a thing in World War II. So it's just hard for me to imagine that the oil companies and the car companies do not somehow have a hand in our local politics. And anyway.
Yeah, Hart, I'm not as cynical as you are. I have been called radical, and I will embrace radical, I guess, given this society. But I am much more hopeful of late that we have opportunities and that the city is understanding the opportunities that we have. Justin pointed out that the mayor gave a speech Earth Day, and he thanked, he made mention of a gentleman who was 99 years of age, whose birthday was on Earth Day, and he mentioned that gentleman. And then he turned, actually, before he mentioned that fellow, he mentioned this group of citizens that's been pushing aggressively every month for 17 months, taking letters to the mayor's office on the 22nd of every month and being assertive about the need to react to climate crisis. And the mayor thanked that group for that action. So what do I hear? I hear the mayor giving us a signal. Be more radical, be more insistent. I need your help. If we're going to make these changes, I need you guys covering my backside. I think this is an opportunity, and I think the mayor just sent us a good signal on that.
And transportation has always been a part of that mayor's Earth Day letter, right?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Well, transportation's always been one of the priorities mentioned in that monthly letter.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Ruth.
2 priorities. One is energy generation, and the second is transportation.
And food. Food is co-equal with those, I believe, but that's another conversation. Ruth?
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing about the city that I'm very pleased about is that they closed off the road that circulates around Cherokee Park.
Yeah.
And you know, when they do something like that, and then people come out and they just embrace it. You should see all the people, and it allows everybody to maintain social distancing. And it's so nice, and the air is so much clearer because we have less traffic. So I think when people start I'm so happy the mayor did that. But I think also when people they start to realize how much more healthy it makes them feel, and how much more social that they are interacting with their friends in a beautiful, beautiful setting.
Yeah.
I think that it'll have an effect on the way we do things in the future. It'll produce more pressure on the city, I think.
There's nothing like experiencing it, right?
Right. That's the point yeah. And we have to have more of these experiences, like you were saying about the 6-lane highway. Why couldn't, at least during the weekend, why couldn't we close two of those lanes during the weekend and open them up to pedestrians and bikes?
Yep. Great idea, Ruth.
And take places, very walkable areas like Bardstown Road and Frankfurt Avenue. The cars buzzing along there and causing traffic noise is just, it ruins the experience, and it's almost something you don't even expect. And then, boom, boom, boom. and can we talk about having park and tark and trolleys serving those areas?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. That's great. We're just about out of the time. I want to quickly thank everybody for taking part in this conversation. Maybe if anybody wants to chip in with 30 extra seconds of something you want to share. Jackie Green, thank you so much for being on the show, Jackie.
Thank you. Let's take back the commons.
Take back the commons. Great one. Jackie Cobb, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Really good conversation.
My soundbite is, let's get the government actually working for us, including Metro Council. I don't care if it's supposed to be a state issue, speak for us. I don't care if it's supposed to be a federal issue, stand up for us.
Yeah, we need people to stand up for us here. And Ruth Newman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this, and I've learned a lot.
It was great having you on Truth to Power here. My name is Justin Mogg. I'm host of Sustainability Now, and I encourage you to tune into the show this week. I'm going to have as my guest Meg Stern from the Kentucky Health Justice Network. We're going to talk about reproductive rights in the time of COVID-19. Hart Hagan is going to be premiering his new Let's Talk show coming this Thursday, new hour-long conversation, right, Hart?
That's right.
Any guests coming up you want to mention?
Well, my frequent partner, Rolf Friss, and I are going to be talking about net neutrality. Don't go to sleep. This is important. Net neutrality, and conversely, what the hell are we doing with technology and letting all these companies control that which was developed at public expense? Don't get me started.
Very cool. That's coming up starting Thursday through Sundays at 7 p.m. And anything on Election Connection really quick you want to mention, Ruth?
Well, yeah, my next guest a week from this coming week, 2 weeks, is going to be David Bollier, and he is an author extraordinaire, and he's going to be talking about the commons. That's exactly what he's going to be talking about.
Well, stay tuned for that here on Forward Radio 106.5 FM, and we will be back in your ears here on Truth to Power in 1 week's time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.